I was on an assignment for the Army, making my way up from San Antonio, Texas to Tacoma, Washington. It was a long drive, and they gave me 6 days to report to my new unit, but I didn't mind. I love road trips. There's nothing like the freedom of exploring the world by yourself. The first day of my journey, I planned to get as much driving in as possible, so I could spend a few days in Utah for a sort of mini vacation, you could say. This was January, and the days were short, so maximizing the amount of daylight I had was crucial. I got up early that morning, carried the last of my bags out to my Corolla, signed out of my old unit, and hit the road at roughly 5 a.m. It was an amazing day. I saw the landscape transform around me as I headed farther west than I'd ever been in my life. From the San Antonio metropolitan area, to the savannas of the Edwards Plateau, to the pancake flat farmlands of the Great Plains region, America's breadbasket. Finally, the farms opened up into prairie, and I saw the "Welcome to Mexico, the land of enchantment" sign. Now I was really in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on US Route 380, I eventually found myself in Roswell. I could have gone a few more hours of driving in and made it to Albuquerque, but I figured since I was in no rush, I might as well see what Roswell had to offer. Who knows if I would have gotten a chance to visit again. As a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, as Mr. Ballin would say, I took a self-guided tour of the shops and attractions. The next day, I continued to Albuquerque, then westward on Interstate 40. By the time I reached Gallup and started northbound on US Route 491, I still had 2 hours of driving left before crossing the border into Colorado, and another 45 minutes before I would get to Cortez, my planned stop for the night. However, my daylight was already running out, as sunset was at 6 p.m. I got Starbucks and refreshed myself for the final stretch. It was supposed to be easy, just a straight shot, but looking back on it now, I figured that had I decided to stop in Albuquerque instead of Roswell the night previous, I would have already been in Colorado by now, and possibly be making my way into Utah. I would have saved myself from what was waiting for me on that desolate highway. Route 491 stretched far into the Navajo Nation. On either side of me were endless expanses of prairie, bookended by dark indigo mountains on the horizon. To my left, the sky glowed a faint orange-purple, the light slowly dying down like smoldering embers in a fire, until finally plunging the land into darkness. Every now and then I would see the forlorn headlights of another car passing by, which gave me a bit of relief that I wasn't alone. I also had my road trip playlist on to keep me company. After passing the small, lonely town of Newcomb, the next piece of civilization would be Shiprock. However, between the two was a 36-mile stretch of absolute nothingness, an abyss I had to cross. I was not ready for what I was about to witness. After several miles, and having not seen another car on the road, I saw something strange emerge from the horizon. Barely lit by the moonlight, I thought it was a road sign at first. Then, as I came closer, I realized it was a person, walking on the shoulder of the road, heading in my direction. I squinted, trying my hardest to focus on the figure. In the darkness, I could tell they were wearing a poncho of some sort, with long, black hair flowing down past their chest. Who could be walking out here, all alone at night? I thought. Whoever it was, they had no lights, no reflectors, no strobes of any kind to signal to passing cars that they were there, and they walked on the pavement dangerously close to oncoming traffic. I pulled to the left a bit, giving them more space. Suddenly, my stereo cut out, as if I'd turned it off. The screen went completely dark, and my phone disconnected from Bluetooth. While this was unusual, it certainly did happen from time to time, so I thought nothing of it. As I approached, I saw the person raise their right arm, as if to flag me down and hitch a ride. Oh no, I thought. There's no way that's happening, buddy. As my headlights swept by, I realized it was a man, dressed in a button-up shirt, a wool poncho, jeans, and cowboy boots. His large belt buckle glinted as the light passed him, but in that split second, I realized with an abject shock that not only were his eyes painfully wide open, but they seemed to be tracking me. Somehow he was able to see me through the glare of my headlights and look me dead in the eyes. not breaking contact until I passed. I was shaken for a bit, but my nerves gradually subsided. My stereo abruptly turned back on, and my music continued playing. I brushed everything off as simply my imagination, the darkness and the shadows playing tricks on my mind. Besides, the man was behind me. I figured he must have been drunk. Indian reservations sadly had high rates of alcoholism. I looked in my rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him. Maybe he's too far behind. No, that couldn't be. It must be too dark. Maybe. I drove on, trying to figure out what had just happened, but at the same time, forcing myself not to think about it. Just when I thought I'd moved on, I saw another shape in the distance. Getting closer, I realized it was another figure. Another person walking alone at night? There's no way. They walked along the shoulder of the road, swaying back and forth. Slowly, I could make out that this person was also wearing a poncho. Then I saw what looked like long black hair, reaching down past the chest. No, there's no way. It was the man. The same man. But how? The man raised his arm again, trying to flag me down. What did this guy want? I kept up my pace with no intention of stopping for any reason. Just like last time, my stereo turned off again. Suddenly, the man leaped out onto the road, arms waving frantically. I swerved into the left lane, narrowly avoiding him. In my headlights, I noticed he had the same wide-eyed look again. His gaze locked onto mine. I also saw that his clothes didn't look as they did the first encounter. They were clean before, if not well worn, but now soiled and tattered, rags barely hanging onto his withered frame. His hair was wild and unkempt, with clods of dried dirt stuck in the locks. But his eyes remained the same. My heart nearly burst through my chest at the sudden shock. Hyperventilating, I slowed down and glanced into the rearview mirror to make sure he was all right. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. The man was running. He was sprinting towards me. I centered the wheel and accelerated, hoping to get as much distance from him as possible. But as I continued to speed up, so did he. Faster and faster I drove, but every time I looked in the mirror, I would still see him right behind me, perfectly keeping pace, his body tinted red by my taillights. I could feel my temples throbbing, and my hands getting slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I was sick to my stomach. There's no way. I looked forward, hoping to see a faint glimmer of light from the town ahead, but I was still too far. I looked back at the rearview mirror. The man was gone. I should have been relieved, but I knew better. Where did he go? I looked around, hoping to regain a visual on him. I couldn't see anything. Taking a deep breath, I refocused on the road, but kept my guard up. Just keep driving, I told myself. Only a few more miles to go. Out of the corner of my right eye, I saw something. Another shape. It wasn't the man. At least I didn't think so. I glanced over, bracing myself for whatever was going to meet my sight. It looked like an animal. Some kind of animal, though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Under the moonlight, I could see it running alongside my car, its forelimbs reaching out in long strides, its back undulating like a dog. Closer and closer it came. The closer it was, the more of it I could see, little by little. Then I noticed. Its limbs were far too long for its body. Its body was too short. It had no tail. The head was oddly round, and from it came a trail of long black hair. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car's engine harder than it had ever been pushed before. By now, I was clocking in well over 100 miles per hour. But this creature, it kept up. It wasn't phased. It simply ran faster and faster to match my speed. Just what was this thing? How could anyone or anything run this fast? The entity seemed to have endless stamina. How long could it keep this up? Just how much faster could it go? Soon my car would hit its top speed, and then what? How long could it maintain that before breaking down? It wouldn't be long until my engine overheats, but regardless, I would eventually run out of gas. And then what? What would happen if that thing got me? At 120 miles per hour, my car had reached its limit. This was the fastest I could go, but the creature continued its pursuit. My temperature gauge was approaching the red, and so was my tachometer. I couldn't keep this up any longer. Suddenly, like the beacon of a lighthouse on a tumultuous sea, the first light of Shiprock came into view. It was close, so close. If I could just go a little longer, I could make it into town, to safety. I pressed on. I fixed my eyes on the lights, growing brighter on the horizon. They bloomed outwards, glimmering in the night air. Though it was a small town, it was a sight for sore eyes in my situation. Looking in my periphery, I saw the undulation of the creature's spine as it kept up with my car. But now it was slipping away, steering farther and farther from the road. It suddenly hit me just how hard my heart was beating. Beads of sweat dripped down my face. I looked over. The creature was gone, but this time, the feeling of dread had also gone with it. My stereo once again turned back on, and as my music resumed, I breathed a deep sigh of relief and let off the accelerator. The man, the creature, whatever it was finally gone, for good. Having white-knuckled the steering wheel the whole time without realizing, my hands were extremely sore, but I was glad to have made it through. A week later, I told another soldier in my unit about what had happened. Being originally from Albuquerque, she was familiar with the Native American legends of the Southwest. The conversation steered toward a certain creature that she would not dare speak the name of. She also told me that the highway I took was well known for all sorts of paranormal phenomena. Google what Route 491 used to be called, and everything will make sense. I can't explain it, and honestly, it keeps me up at night. This happened a few years back. I was 11 at the time, and I was with my family driving in the outskirts of Montana, middle of the night, dead of winter. We used to own this place out in the literal middle of nowhere, and every once in a while we'd drive out there and spend a week fishing, camping, and hiking. So we're driving back towards civilization. Everyone is tired, and I think Skynyrd was on the CD player. Big walls of snow on either side of the road. Beyond the dirty snowbanks, you could see really thick tree lines. We're cruising along, climbing up over this mountain pass. I remember I had half of my forehead pressed against the cold glass, while I tiredly watched what little snow and nature I could make out in the dark, when I see this person. I'll always remember her as female. Maybe that's just what I settled on in my head, but either way, they were wearing a tattered coat, multiple layers, carrying a couple of big bags, and I remember seeing a flash of a cold face. I wasn't the only one to see her. My dad mumbled, "See that? Must be freezing out there." My mom said something like, "Maybe we should give them a ride," but we were already a half-mile away. My little sister was asleep, but the talking woke her up, and when I told her what I saw, I might have added a couple of creepy details, like a hook for a hand or something. She got creeped out and kept her eyes glued to the window for the next few miles. We get to the top of the mountain. I think I could tell because I got that funny feeling in my ears, and we begin the descent down the other side. The driving conditions weren't great, but the old family truck was doing just fine. We level out a bit, thank God, and I start scanning the distance for any sign of the city, towns, anything. Nothing. Snow, trees, maybe a sign sprayed with buckshot. Totally alone. We begin the real descent when we started winding down this mountain pass. Hairpin turns. Everyone's on edge. Mom tries to get us to go back to sleep, but I can't. I have this funny feeling. I'm staring out the window at the snow and trees. We haven't passed a car for what seemed like hours. I remember my dad starts talking about something, and that's when I see her again. Standing out in the snow, I get a brief glimpse when they're illuminated by the headlights, but then, gone, streaming past us into the dark. This time I got a better look of her face, and I wish I hadn't. A really strange smile in the middle of a very disfigured face. Maybe like a horrible burn. In that brief second, I can't get the image out of my head. It felt like she was staring right at me, smiling with some twisted kind of understanding in her small black eyes. We drive on for a bit. I remember just staring out the window. It immediately struck me. How did she get there? How could she travel miles and miles in front of us? We didn't pass a car, truck, anything. And there wasn't any other road out there. This part of the story I get a bit hazy on, mainly because I don't really remember. I just sort of remember sitting there, thinking, trying to make sense of it all. We get to the bottom of that mountain and make it to some roadside motel. We all stomp the snow off our boots before walking into the room. I didn't sleep much. Might have been the altitude getting to me. The next morning we find this little diner right outside the town we stayed in. Classic trucker stop. I remember the smell of snow, salt, and blood in my nose. After the bill was paid and we zipped up our coats, I heard the door chime. We were all heading out, and I looked up and saw her again. Same coat, dozens of hooded sweaters, the big bags filled with what looked like damp clothing. I was walking out behind my dad. He towered over me, but I remember this look she gave me as she passed. She really looked like she hated me, like she knew things I didn't, like she enjoyed the idea of someone suffering, all with that big disfigured smile. She stopped beside me, but I stayed behind my dad until we got to the car. I don't know what really was going on. Couldn't help but feel bad for him. Maybe they were truly lost out there. Maybe someone hurt them. There's probably a dozen explanations, but I can't shake that weird feeling like she was following us. This happened right before my 20th birthday when I was in the U.S. Navy. I was stationed at a Navy school in South Carolina the entirety of my enlistment, close to Charleston but not actually in the city. It wasn't uncommon for people with cars to drive into the city, and everyone was friends with someone with a car. Me and my class leader, we'll call him Pete, were really close, and he was friends with this guy from New York that I didn't much like. We'll call him Tom. Anyways, Tom had a car, so we ended up doing a lot together. One night, after all three of us had tanked on an important test, I convinced him to go out for ice cream. We decided on this little mom-and-pop type shop on the far side of Charleston and piled into Tom's truck. After we got ice cream, we got in the truck and Pete started to give Tom directions. Tom couldn't find his way out of a shoebox, but Tom insisted he knew a shortcut and we needed to just enjoy the ride. We didn't have anything early the next day, so I figured who cares? This'll probably be a funny story later when Tom gets us lost. We're driving for at least twice as long as it would have taken to get back to base, but Tom keeps promising that we're almost there. Meanwhile, we haven't seen a building in at least 10 miles, and the road is so dark I feel like I'm looking into an abyss. Tom mentions that he has to pee, so Pete and I tell him to just pull over and take a leak. The road was lined with the forest, so he had options to save his dignity, but he insists on pulling all the way off the road. Tom finds a dirt road and turns down it, and Pete and I look at each other and both say he needs to stop. Pete and I are both from the South, while Tom grew up mostly in New York City, so Pete and I both knew how real shoot first, ask questions later can be. But Tom kept saying he was just going to go a little further through the trees. I'm thinking about how we're going to get shot just because I wanted ice cream when we break through the tree line. About 20 yards in front of us was a big bonfire that was bright even compared to the light from the new moon. Immediately, my stomach dropped, and Pete and I started screaming at Tom to turn around. That's when we noticed the figures around the fire and those closing in around us. Tom was frozen in the driver's seat, so I reached into the front and put the truck in reverse while hitting him repeatedly in the shoulder. Tom slowly turned around to check behind him to back up, only for him to freeze again. I turned and saw more figures closing in around the trail behind us. Pete by now had pulled out a flashlight and was trying to blind the figures, while repeatedly telling Tom to just go and that they'd move. Tom starts to slowly make his way back while Pete's whipping the flashlight around, and I'm making sure all the doors are locked and rolling up the rear windows and closing the back sliding window. The crowd parted like we were Moses and they were the Red Sea, and we made it back onto the road without any problems. We rode the rest of the ride in almost complete silence, and the three of us have never actually spoken about it since. The only thing that was said the ride home was when Pete turned to me and said, "They didn't have faces."